Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stream. I want to apologize for the last video there. It was a bit of a technical issue I was facing, but nonetheless, this video here will be discussing my review of Final Fantasy XIV second expansion, which is Stormblood. Now, this is going to be quite a long topic, so please bear with me. And we'll be dividing it into portions as we go through, certain topics in this discussion. So, without further ado, let's get started then, shall we? So, Stormblood. This would begin the series of the patch 4.0 series. And as it was being pushed out information about it, there was a lot of hype and a lot of excitement going on for it. This is, after all, the second expansion that we've come to know in 14. Unless, of course, you've been a 1.0 player, then technically I guess this is like a quote-unquote third. But, let's skip technicalities here and just focus on that it is a lot of people's second expansion. So, with that in mind, let's discuss. We'll start with its initial release and its launch. Okay, so we had the opening video and trailer, as we do with all the expansions that they've brought so far. Pretty hype stuff. It's pretty cool seeing everything in CGI and all that, and seeing some of, the new places that we'll be visiting, or hopefully be visiting, and also seeing what could be potentially new jobs, etc. Which in this particular trailer, the new job that we saw teased off was Samurai. Okay, so that in mind, with this trailer, we get an idea that we're kind of traveling eastward, and more particular, to be precise, we're going far east. So everyone's pretty excited about that, and we're all pretty hype. Well, some of that initial excitement and kind of went down the drain just a little bit, as the launch was a bit of a chaotic mess, you could say. And because of that, it was off to a very, very shaky and rocky start to begin with. And I'm talking, there's like a lot of disconnections going on between servers and players. Now, this wasn't by any means anyone's ISP's fault per se. That could have been a factor into it, but the disconnections were on a very massive scale. So that tells you then it was something to do server side, and something was not quite right with Square Enix's servers. Which, I mean, it's not a hard thing to imagine, considering, they haven't really upgraded their servers in these, 4 years of development. They've been the same servers And in fact, some of the servers were even condensed and pushed into each other to save on space and room for more development and such. But this didn't quite go well for this second expansion. It worked for the first one, Heaven's Ward, but for this one, it wasn't working. It wasn't doing nearly any justice as it could have. And so, we'd have not only the disconnections happening, but there is also very high-strung wait times just for your character to be loaded into the game itself, which is a completely and other matter entirely. But those of us who were lucky enough to get in, however, there was more issues going on with the game itself. And of course that was that several instances, these are solo instances by the way, were just not working. They were crashing very, very much. And people couldn't get through one in particular, which was at the very start of this expansion, which was called, if I can get the exact quest name right again, shoot, it's been a while, sorry, but they've the player base kind of made fun of it in a way, jokingly, to kind of break the tension somewhat, that they started calling it Raubon's Wall or Raubon Extreme. All those silly things just to meme on it, make light of it, but it was a very serious issue, all jokes aside. And basically, it was frustrating a lot of players. And I'm not talking just like a small portion of players. Oh no. No, it was a huge chunk of the players from all data centers, not just one data center. It was on all data centers, so all of them were affected by this. And so, there's multiple reports flying in on the official forums, the support for Square Enix and all that. And, support was really kind of not giving solid definition of what was going on. I assume that was because they were already beginning the report after the first, first 30 or so reports that came in. They started investigating the matter. And so they were looking into this a lot, and excuse me. They're investigating in this report, and so they found out that there was sort of a lot of proxies servers being used and personally attacking Final Fantasy XIV. This is what they call DDoS or DDoSS, whatever you wish to call it. And essentially what it does is it creates several signals at a time and injects them all at once into a single point. And so this DDoS going on during the launch was very consequential for the development team and Square Enix itself. And it was not good for players, the consumer, either. Many people started threatening, to withdraw their subscription from 14 and never come back, to basically, get a refund, that they were ripped off, they were cheated on getting, their expansion here, Stormblood. A lot of people were very angered by it, very annoyed. So you have all these, these reports, and then you have these threats going on. It was just really messy and very chaotic. And it didn't just stop there with the Raubon instance either. No, it kind of pushed onward to the next instance, which is like 6 or so quests down the line. That instance started crashing a lot too. Even after, Square Enix decided to make a countermeasure for it, for the first instance problem, where they split the map instances into 3 portions where only a handful of players could enter at a time. And if you weren't able to be in that handful of players, then you would have to basically wait in a queue for however long. So, and that's assuming, of course, you didn't, like I said, disconnect from Square Enix server, the game server itself, and then you'd have this big headache of another queue waiting for your character to be loaded into the game yet again. So it was not a good time. It was very frustrating for myself personally and some of my friends I know. And I'm sure there's many of you out there who've been playing for that long that were kind of irritated about it as well. And it was very unpleasant. It's something that we will never live down either or forget, because this really affected the start of the game very negatively. And when something like this arises, even though if it was indeed DDoS, this was not Square Enix's fault by any means, or the development team, staff that worked on it, but it's still something that affects the game and overall experience of the expansion to start off. And so, it's kind of, for my own self, led to a decision which I really wasn't hoping to make, I didn't plan to make, and was very unfortunate for me to make, but I had to take, this incentive that they gave out after the fact of this matter is, in order to do sort of a crowd control, if you will, they offered free transfers to maybe less congested servers. They compiled the list and data from the game just and found, there's these servers that were with high levels of congestion, like as in there's like several players on it, breaching, into the thousands. And then there was these smaller players which were just like very small and only in the hundreds. And so they gave this incentive to help sort of diffuse the tension a little. It was a free transfer, so it cost nothing at all to transfer. It was free because the development team, they felt that anger, that rage and stuff that we consumers had, and concerns as well, and they thought that this would be something that could make up for, their sort of misstep in not seeing something like this could have even happened to begin with. And so they were kind of creating these incentives for the player to sort of maybe move over to servers that were less congested and less crowded, that were a lot more easier for, this gameplay experience overall, starting off with Stormblood. And so what that incentive was a free transfer to any server of your choosing, as long as it's not one that was congested or superly crowded. And you would get a large portion of gil if you lost, let's say, property, or if you've lost, furnishings. If you were in an apartment or free company room, they reimbursed all of that with a set amount of gil. I believe for the furnishings, it was around 300,000 gil, and then if you lost a house, they gave you a sort of base value depending on what size of the plot it was. If it was like a small, for example, your reimbursement would have been 3 mil. If it was a medium, then it'd be like somewhere around like 8 mil, and then if it was a large, you would get like 20 or however mil the base was, and then you'd kind of be able to afford another house on the server that you moved to, hopefully, assuming there was space available, room available. And even if you had an apartment, like, they still that's other gil that they reimbursed as well. You got basically the initial cost of the apartment back, so there was that as well. And another thing that they did is they said if you created a character, or you're a new character, or new player, I should say, sorry, on a less congested server, and one that's been labeled as preferred, then if you level the character up to level 30, then they would give you a free 30-day subscription. And that was another incentive that players took advantage of, so that they could get back that money that they feel by rights that they were cheated out of because of all this DDoS incidents and failed instances happening, as well as the increasingly long and arduous queue wait times. So they gave this as a means of softening the blow, you could say. And as I said, myself, I regrettably had to make the choice to move from my server at the time, because it was incredibly congested. It was full of thousands of players, and it was very hard and very difficult to enjoy the game on the server that I was playing on, even though I had many friends and I had a free company, which I had started and helped get it on its feet and everything. And it was just very regretful, very painful decision to decide that I needed to make the move in order to make this game playable. And so it's something I will never forget, this experience, which kind of forced my hand, and I had to take advantage of the incentive they were offering to go somewhere where it's more quiet, more easily controlled, the problem. And thus am I here now, and have stayed here since, in the server of Mateus. And it's been a very nice server thus far. I mean, it was a ghost town before all this happened. It was pretty desolate, pretty empty. There was literally not a single player in sight. Maybe a Greenleaf alt or, something like that on the server, just kind of around. And there's plenty of like free open spots for housing as well, which was the biggest issue of using the transfer that they were giving, is that you'd have to make sure that there was space available. And so, Mateus, as I investigated, I had an alt here already, so I investigated this server, and it was also one of the preferred servers that they labeled as preferred. And, it was just pretty controlled here. It was pretty quiet. But then, after about a month, though, it did fill up really fast. From my other server, which, for your information, I know this might I cause a little bit of what you'd say biased, and I get that, but please take it easy on me. I was on the server known as Balmung, and that server is known widely and popularly for its roleplay community and sort of mid-core to casual fan base plays there. They just all kind of just flock there in droves. And a lot of them were in the same situation as me too. They all had to give up so much just to be able to enjoy the expansion. And so they just, I guess a portion or group of them, sort of moved over here to this Mateus because it was in the same data center, and still is. And they started to congregate here, and they noticed, other players caught on after, the small group, people within the small group started posting, hey, my friends and my comrades on Balmung, there's this new haven. It's got a lot of free space. There's housing available, apartments available, and all that. And we can roleplay here again without being threatened by, tremendous amounts of DC broken instance and all that, and having just troubles enjoying the game overall because of congestion and DDoS. And so Mateus started filling up, and the development team saw that. Oh, as if they didn't have enough headaches already, right? And then, so they took off preferred status on Mateus. It was no longer a preferred world for transfers. And so then people are like, well, I guess we'll have to call it done there. We'll have to look for other servers. So they started branching out to other servers as well. And it kind of did help the solution just ever so slightly, having people sort of leave these, overly populated, overly stressed out servers in favor of something that's a little more controlled, more calm. And with that, people taking advantage of the free transfer and stuff, getting all their gil back, all their housing, maybe some, not all, which again I said is a regrettable situation to face because of how very scarce, how very limited housing is in 14. So it's very unfortunate for those who did transfer and they didn't get the house back, but they did get their gil's worth back. And to top it off, if they did the new character thing, they also got, a free sub courtesy of Square Enix for N14's development team as a sort of, apology and, sort of their way of not incentivizing, sorry, but sort of make up for the disaster of this launch, because they were, I'm sure, very frightened that this was going to be another 1.0 doomsday scenario for them. I'm sure that's what was going through, Naoki Yoshida's head and a few of the other senior staff that he has under his crew. I'm sure they were pretty rattled by this just as much as we were. And there were some people, the veteran players from 1.0 that were probably on the same boat as them with that, thinking, oh boy, this is gonna be it, huh? This is how we go out. This is how it finally ends again. And so they just thought, if they could somewhat quell us, put things back in order, then they could continue back on a foot on a better light. And they did exactly that, which I'm quite grateful that they did that. It shows that, they really support this community, and they really think about their consumers and that their best interest, And so I'm thankful for that they did indeed pull things around, and that things did settle, and that we got the rest of the expansion, because, it would have been very tragic if they had to have canceled the 4.0 series because, all this stuff going on. It would have been so very, tragic, and they would have had to refund, so many people, or face a lawsuit, essentially, from one or many attorneys, depending on, how vicious it could have gone. And that's something that Square Enix definitely wants to avoid at all costs, as they want to avoid having lawsuits pursued against them for, breaking, the basic rules of mercantilism and, trade. So they definitely turned things around from that, that failure of a launch. Let's be honest here. This is why I'm making this video, to be honest. That launch was indeed a failure, despite, their press trying to soften the blow and humor with it, saying best game out of all, rated top reviews, over millions of players. Yeah, that was not true, and it was false propaganda. Which, that's something you should never do either in a game like this, an MMO, one that's received by a very large audience. You should never, lie about things like that and provide false propaganda, because then, when the new player does come in and they realize, they start playing after they realize, but they said on this website, on this ad, they said, it was the best. It had so many players, but here I am, and there's only like a dozen players. What gives, So that was a very bad way to go about that propaganda like that. And hopefully, the advertisement whichever team is in charge of the advertising. Hopefully they've learned from that, and they'll take it from us, our feedback, that's not the way you should go about things, and you should be very honest with your consumers if you want them, to continue to pay you, continue to offer you their hard-earned money. You shouldn't continue to, make these false statements. But anyway, let's move on from the launch, and now let's go into the content and gameplay mechanics themselves. So, with content-wise, we've essentially got the same old, the usual, that you were used to since 14's relaunch, that being primal fights, raids, like high-end raids, and just content for, all kinds of players here. And so we got that usual stuff, but then they've added a few newer features to the game, which are something that we haven't seen in the previous expansion that occurred, and that would be that they added, this system called squadrons, adventure squadrons. And basically what that is it's where you're able to take a party of NPCs. Now, these are not ones that you created yourself. They're ones that were pre-generated by Square Enix, and sort of given a little bit of personality, a little bit of specified looks. And you basically take them in with you in certain dungeons, certain instances, and they would help you basically, level up, an alternate class, or maybe an existing, or, one that you're working on currently, I guess. Sorry, not existing. That was not the word I was looking for, but... And so we got those, and they were pretty nifty. They're pretty useful, They had some, problems. They weren't perfect, like most things aren't. They're not usually perfect. But overall, I would say it was something interesting, to say the least. And although it doesn't hold a lot of people's attention, it does have a certain charm to it. And when you're someone, who maybe mains a DPS class, for example, the queues for waiting to just get a party can be quite long and a bit painful. So this was made in consideration for that. And I would say it worked pretty well. It served its function. And they even added some rewards for the players that were doing, leveling up this squadron and all that, and getting these NPCs. They made rewards for it. They increased your Grand Company rank, because that's what it's through, and you got some glamour to go with it as a reward, and a few emotes, so it was definitely something that they wanted players to use a lot. And so it was a good idea, and I think it was very successful, and they've only continued to improve upon it since then. Like, now you can customize, what they wear, and, you can give them, like, certain AI behaviors to follow, which will basically optimize them in the long run so that you can, get through the content that you go through with them a lot quicker through this optimization of AI behavior. And not only that, they added this other reward, like say, for whatever reason you just want to be a solo player and you don't really like loud and noisy groups, and you just kind of want to do things your own pace and on your own time, etc. So they added, buffs, which you can get from your squadron from specialized missions that are on a weekly timer. I kind of wish that it was on, sort of daily timer, but, that's me. Maybe they'll consider it, maybe they won't, I don't know, but these missions are a little more difficult to do, and you yourself don't actually go on them with them for these missions, but you more or less deploy them. So I guess in the way you can say it's kind of like the retainer system that we've had since A Realm Reborn. Whereas, you give them gear and you dress them up, and basically they bring back stuff to you that you want brought back. I mean, it gives you a list of the reward that comes with the mission, so it's a lot like that. And I can see, that from a development standpoint, that probably saved a lot of costs and a lot of time for them to do things that way. And it was overall, I'd say, very, very uplifting and very positive. So, good on you, devs, for making the adventure squadrons. It was fun, and it was different. It was something that was a change of pace. Although, like I said, it doesn't cater to all players. It's more for, like I said, those who wish to play solo, level on their own, or maybe they don't want to wait for DPS times if they're a DPS. Or, just more casual players, basically, is what it was aimed for. And that's okay, because like I said, the mid-core to hardcore players, they've got their own things. They got newer raids to challenge, newer fights, extreme fights, and such to challenge. And so, they did get that, which was nice. Now, moving on from squadrons, there was changes to PvP. And, well, I mean, this wasn't a positive change either. It did not go over smoothly for those who were really into the PvP scene back in Heaven's Ward and enjoyed it. It kind of caused a huge trickle off. And the reason being was because, they reduced a lot of the players' freedom, a lot of choice that they've had. And in one of the modes, they took away a player's rights to, speak freely and openly. Which, I mean, honestly, sometimes things do get really heated in PvP. I mean, it's meant to be a competitive sort of sport-like thing. And, that happens a lot. A lot of people will get frustrated at their teammates, or they'll get frustrated, that they're constantly losing, and sometimes that leads to some really very angry and very nasty words being exchanged. And so it was something that they took away the freedom to chat through there because it was getting, I guess, a little out of hand in their own words. And so they made instead like pre-made quotes, I guess, that you could assign to your hotbar and use to communicate with your teammates to, you know, alert them that you have that this is your strategy, you know, like attacking melee, or I'm going after the healer, etc., etc. So, I mean, people did make it work ultimately, but it didn't help with the other issue, which was that, you know, their skill set was basically cut in half, and their you know, their overall stats, PvP stats and stuff was also cut in half. So it kind of, you know, hurt a lot of the PvP community who was enjoying what it was before, when, you know, they actually, you know, kind of had more options available to them, and they were able to, you know, utilize all of their job instead of having it, you know, condensed and simplified to where it's, you know, one thing. And I guess in their mind they thought like it was equal in a sense, you could say. Like, to them, doing this was equal, but unfortunately it wasn't really. In fact, it gave it gave tanks and healers more of an advantage over those who were DPS, and some DPS had more advantages over other types of DPS, like ranged, for example, were so, you know, overly powered that, you know, melee just don't stand a single chance. They're like dead before they even get a hit. And that was a very huge issue for a very long time. And then healers were just, you know, healers were just unkillable. You could not kill them as a DPS or a tank. It was just so ridiculous. You'd have like, you know, you'd have like a small party up against the healer, and the healer just wouldn't die no matter what you did, because their shields and their healing potencies were just ridiculously high that you just don't have a chance. And where they just can, you know, pick you off one by one. Which ultimately was a problem they faced even in Heaven's Ward with the warrior job, where it was so overly powered that, you know, they basically you know, just one shot a player. And a lot of players voiced their opinion, saying it wasn't fair, a fair contest with that in mind. So the devs really had to put their heads together with the battle team and figure out, you know, like what solutions they could find to make this potentially easier and more fair to the players involved in playing the PvP matches. Now, to kind of, you know, update it even just ever so slightly, they introduced 2 new modes in PvP. One being the Feast, which is the usual 4-man party against another 4-man party. And your goal in the Feast was basically to earn medals by killing the opposing team and picking up the medals that they drop as they're defeated. And the player that reached the goal of, I believe it was 100 medals, was claimed victor. And so they gave that a test out for a while, and, you know, it was pretty fun. I'm not gonna lie, it was fun for a while, but then, you know, as with all good things, they come to an end, and unfortunately, this one ended because there were too many cheaters. And that's been another consistent problem they've had with PvP, is that there's way too many people abusing the game itself in PvP by purchasing and downloading hacks, as well as just making it so that they can have an unfair advantage and get their, whatever it is they're after, get their wins for a reward that they wanted, or whatever, And so it just kind of tore the PvP community down a whole lot. And then they added this other mode, like I said, and this is called Rival Wings, so that kind of trickled things down a little bit, and a lot of players were jumping back into PvP for just a while. I mean, we all had high hopes that this was going to all work out, but again, massive cheaters just ruin it for everyone, and they'd use bots, and they'd use different, hacking cheats to give an unfair advantage and ruin, the experience for all the other players involved. But there is one thing, however, that Square Enix did, which kind of didn't soften the blow at all, and that was the incentives they were providing to push players into it. And that was that they started adding experience points as a reward to people entering player versus player. And there's a good chunk of experience, and that got a lot of these cheaters thinking, oh hey, you know what, I'll just use my bots, they'll fight for me in my place, and they'll get me my experience that I need to level up this job that I don't want to level, And so they kind of really shot themselves in the foot by doing that. Even though I know it was done with the spirit of trying to get people back into PvP and play it, but it just damaged it even further. And, I hope going forward with PvP, hopefully, by this next expansion going in, they've learned from their mistakes, they've learned their lesson, and that, for PvP, they just, they make it more fair and more available, more available to everyone. And, that they just make it so that, people can't abuse it, and that if their system detects any, like, unfair advantages or something is amiss with the players using this new PvP that they decide, or maybe they don't decide to bring, that a system will be implemented that if the player is, not using, a parameter, I guess you could say, if they're not using the set parameters and that their parameters are way off, like they're going beyond what the devs set as normal, then I hope that they add this system to sort of counter that that it detects like that, yeah, they're abusing the system, so they'll be punished As in, they'll get a lockout and they won't be able to, duel or do PvP mode because the system detected an error on their, their software or whatever it is that gave them, it boosted them far beyond what the average preset is set on. So I hope that something like that will come about, and I think that will greatly take the cheaters out of the game and eventually make it so that it's fair and equal for everyone, and that, everyone has a chance, rather than some people having no chances at all against a cheater, So, let's hope that the battle team has learned and that they'll, continue to improve upon it and look for ways, like I said, suggested there, look for ways to counteract people that are using hacks and cheats. Because that would bring about a more enjoyable experience overall, in my opinion. And it would make things more of a fair contest. But even then, though, in the essence of PvP, there's always going to be people that are better, better equipped, better skilled than you. And they know, the ins and outs of how their jobs work. There's always going to be those people. So, I mean, it's not like you're going to win every time. So, losses are to be expected. If we're going to be fair about it. Losses are going to be expected. But that doesn't mean that we should allow the cheaters to gain advantages either. So, hopefully, like I said, they've learned, and then they'll make a system which will lock out any cheaters, people that use hacks, that use these cheats to get an advantage. Hopefully they'll develop a system that will automatically detect if they go beyond the parameters that are set as average, and it will lock them out from doing any of the PvP for a while. Like, let's say, I don't know, the lockout will be like 12 hours or something like that, to sort of, give them the hint that, yeah, you should stop cheating right now. And if they do cheat a second time, like, if the system detects them cheating a second time, the time will overextend to 24 hours or whatever, etc. So that, it will teach these people that you are not allowed to cheat. And that if you want to earn the rewards and stuff that's tied to it, you need to play fairly and not play dirty. Essentially. So hopefully they can look into something like that for the future of player versus player type content. Now moving on is another content which was added back in Heaven's Ward, which is the Deep Dungeon. They continued this series and they've added newer mechanics to it. And, they call them Palmanders, and they basically give you certain, like, either buffs, or they kind of help you navigate a lot easier through the deep dungeon. And they have these things they call Magicite, where it allows you to summon a random primal. Well, I shouldn't say random, only There's only like one that's kind of a rarity or random, and it summons, basically summons Odin. And he cleaves everything on the floor so that they're dead. And then, but yeah, the other ones are Ifrit, Garuda, and Titan, and those ones are, you can easily distinguish. And so that was a lot of fun. I thought it was very interesting, and they also changed the aesthetic. Instead of going, instead of going downward towards sort of hell, I guess you could say, we're actually ascending. So we're going upward towards heaven, I guess. Hence the name of this new deep dungeon, Heaven on High. So it was interesting, to say the least, and the aesthetic was good as well. So I really enjoyed, the deep dungeon that they added. It was a lot of fun, and it was very enjoyable for me overall. I even pushed myself to do the harder floors this time. But unfortunately, even though I did that, I didn't get to the last set due to unfortunate circumstances, which I'm not gonna, touch upon, because that's a personal matter, why it didn't succeed. So, but I did have a good time with it overall, and it was good to see, that they didn't lose their touch with that, and it was lots of fun. And now comes, the next type of contents that they were adding, a newer one, and that is called Eureka. And this Eureka was heavily influenced by another content like it, which was in Heaven's Ward, which is called the Diadem. And so it was this sort of instance zone which you go into with a lot of other players, and you work together to achieve a certain goal, which that goal which you were to achieve this time in this type of content wasn't just to do objectives like in Diadem, or to gather a certain node, farm a certain node, or certain fight, but rather it was to help you build up your relic weapon, your relic gear sets too, which was interesting that they added the relic gear sets into it, because prior to that, all they would do with these gear sets is they would just be something that you would use for a little bit until you upgraded to the next best thing. But this time around, you're able to upgrade the gear as well as the weapon, which was pretty neat and interesting. It was something that they haven't tried before, and I thought that was pretty clever, pretty unique for them to try. And it also gave, that type of content, the relic content, meaning in a sense. So that I can say in positive light for Eureka, but there is some loose ends in Eureka, and that was being there's a leveling system they added to it, and the purpose of the leveling system was kind of to encourage players to grow stronger within these these zones, these stuff. But The only difference being is that, you're not earning experience like you do in the Outworld or, in other types of content. And in fact, your gains of experience were very comparatively low, especially if you were grouped up in a party with other players. Like if you were in a group with other players, your your personal EXP gain was very, very low. And, that's not something that's very acceptable. And worse still is that if you died and you weren't in a party, if you were just out in the zone, exploring or trying to, complete an objective that was tied to a story involved in Eureka, and if you died and you didn't have, like a red mage or, which we'll talk about red mage. Don't worry, we're getting to the jobs. If you don't have a red mage or a summoner or another healer, nearby or willing to come save you, then you had to, go back to the restart area, which is the normal thing, in the open world. We're used to that. We know it happens, but the issue is that you de-level. You lose experience. And it's not, it's not just like a little itty bit of experience you lose. Oh no. No. You lose like almost half of the experience you just gained. Okay? And so that to me right there sort of sends a bad message from whichever developer had designed this content. That to me sends the message, that they're mocking us, they're making fun of us. That they're like, oh, I'm sorry you just died. Here, let's make it worse. And we're going to take away, your work that you worked on too. So, tough luck, man. I guess you better learn to get good, That's what kind of message it sends. And it's very frustrating, to a lot of players. Especially when this was said to be something that's, solo friendly, in the words from Naoki Yoshida. This was something that was intended for everyone to be able to do. Well, that's not the case. That did not be the case at all. And you were forced, basically, either have a party with a healer to increase your chance of success, or don't and fail, and have to restart all over again. And that can be very, very frustrating, especially, let's not forget here, this is not a free-to-play MMO. This is an MMO that we are paying for out of pocket to play monthly. It's a subscription-based MMO. And to have content like this where it's basically, telling your player, fuck off, take your money, I don't want it, I want to punish you for playing, that's not okay. It's very, very not okay. And so, because of that, Eureka got a huge, huge backlash from a portion of the community, like a big portion. Not half, but a big significant portion. This got a really bad rap and gave Eureka bad attention. Which overall, made it even more difficult for players to jump in and enjoy, because it was just so terribly punishing and harsh. And what's worse is that even after receiving, this negative feedback, they continued to develop another one that was just as bad. Like, what I'm thinking in my head, what is going on here? They tell us, give us feedback. We want to know. So, we gave them feedback. We gave them good and bad feedback. Like I just did, I said good feedback, and now I'm giving you the bad feedback here. But they completely just, shoved, the bad feedback aside, and they're just like, okay, he said he liked that. This guy said they liked that. They said they liked that. Okay, well, let's just add that into this next zone, and then, we'll just keep everything else. So those bad people, yeah, let's just ignore them. They don't know anything. They don't know what they're talking about. We're the developer, they're the player, so they can just, they can just shut up and not let, and that's not okay. Like I said, for a game like this, that's subscription based. You cannot, and I repeat, you cannot have that kind of attitude for people that are consumers, who are paying you to make them satisfied with the game. Okay? That is not acceptable. And that's a huge and major cop-out. So, I hope that they really consider that, they need to be mindful of all feedback, not just, one group, not just one that's saying everything in a positive light. They need to take consideration the negative ones as well. Otherwise, it's just going to continue to spiral downward until eventually, people are just going to say, you know what, I don't want to play anymore. I'll go play something else. So, and that was my frustrating experience with Eureka overall. Was the fact that they ignored, all the feedback in favor of just, one group's feedback. A sort of pick and choose mentality, which is very unacceptable. And so, in later iterations of Eureka, they started testing other ideas. They added a new system, the Logos Action system, where you would basically, find these sort of nodes or whatever you want to call them, and then you would turn them into a special action, which should increase your chances of success and playability in the Eureka zone. Like, you'd have, let's say you mix, like, these nodes into one, and it forms, like, a sort of regenning ability. Okay, so there you have it. You have your own personal healing ability, which is quite beneficial if you're not a healer type player. Like, if you're a tank, or you're, DPS and whatever. It was very beneficial to have, these logos. And so they continued to expand upon it, and Then there's the reward system, of course, which is something they borrowed from the deep dungeon aspect, where you would get these sort of like tokens, if you will, and then you would turn these tokens in to an NPC, and then you would get a randomly based reward. And so they kind of brought that idea back into, which it's fine, it's kind of like, getting, that surprise you're like, oh, hey, look what I just got from this random, this random, like, token or whatever, and, they're so, I mean, it's what they thought would work out, but because the chances of getting the other things was so rare in the system that they coded, a lot of people kept getting miscellaneous stuff like the Eureka potion, which, is basically a regen of itself, which is on a cooldown, and then just, junky material, fireworks, it just was very frustrating to a lot of players, so they were very vocal about that as well. And so, they pulled back. They're like, okay, maybe we shouldn't do that. We've had our laughs in, or whatever. Let's, so they went in, changed the code to where, you wouldn't get potions or other things as often, and that you actually had a higher chance of getting something more rare, like a housing item or glamour item, or a mount. Even mount was of course the rarest, so they weren't gonna make that so like easily obtained to where you could get it within 5 chances. No. It's more like, one, you get a mount like in one in every 50 or so. So the mount is the rarest of the rare in that sort of system, but a lot of people can still get like a lot of other things, like I mentioned, housing items, glamour, etc. So that was pretty, whatever. I didn't have a problem with it myself, because like I said, it's something they already had in the deep dungeon. It's something that they brought over because they knew, like, there was a lot of players, that did like the element of surprise. But, it does get old and, stale after a while. It may be fun at first, but, it does tend to get, very tiresome, very draining after a while. So they've improved upon it in other iterations of Eureka. And so finally, we reach the last Eurekan area, and I just don't really know. It was, they combined everything that was received positively into this last Eureka, with it consideration, of course, to the negatives as well. And then they even added something new into this last Eureka zone, which they call the Baldessian Arsenal, which is basically the Eureka zone's endgame content. And well, they made this so very, very punishing, so very hardcore, that if you had made it that far and you were a mid-core or casual player, you would just have no chance at all for this. Even if you have the best gear, you've leveled all your gear, you've got all the best in slot, stuff, and materia melds, it just doesn't matter. You'd have to have skill and coordination and group effort in there. Otherwise, you're not going to make it and you're going to wipe. And the other thing is with the wiping part of this is if you wiped, you are not allowed back in until another instance is spawned. And healers, they made sure to lock healers from not being able to, res. So, they had to basically use a logos res, which anyone can get if they play their cards right and whatever. And of course, if RNG, be God merciful, they could get this logos action, which would allow for rezzing, but again, it requires lots of skill, communication with your team, and coordination. And they've made that quite explicitly clear during the live letter announcement of it, that, this is not content that's for everyone. It's specifically, aimed targeting the hardcore players. But, that didn't stop mid-core and casuals from trying anyway. Despite of the warnings. And, that's just how players are, They're not going to heed warnings, even if the dev team's warning if they're saying, hey, you're not going to have a good time in there, buddy. Maybe you should, stick to what you know best. People are not going to, heed that advice, and they're going to try anyway. And so this led to even more backlash, and more, just sort of this toxic behavior, toxicity towards Eureka. So, and then, of course, they did apologize. They came out with an apology for it, It's kind of sad that they decided to do that. I would have just, if it were me, I would have just say, we offered to warn you, why did you still not heed the warning, That's what I would have worded, but, they just wanted to sort of quell all the bad and negativity around this, They wanted to make sure, that the majority were satisfied. And, it's unfortunate, though, because the majority is a casual fan base here in 14. You don't have a large hardcore fan base in this game, even though, there's these people get all high and mighty and claim, I know so and so. I can have anyone at my beck and call because I have all these link shows, all these groups, I mean, let's be real here. Come on, guys. Don't bullshit us. Don't try to, shoot the shit, whatever. We know you're faking, okay? We know you have, one group of maybe, 20 or so people. And that's it. So, don't bullshit us. We know the truth. We know that you hardcore players are rare among MMO games in general. So the majority, like I said, being casual, voiced their concerns and everything. So, producer came out. He even asked, the poor guy he tasked with for creating Eureka, he even asked that guy, he said, hey, I need you to write up a response as well. So the guy had to write up a response as well, and so they wrote up their response, their apologies, basically saying, at the time we didn't really consider what might happen, what could happen, and, they were basically saying that, this experience has taught us, that we should be more careful, and so, he said basically they're working to improve that in the next, type of content that they're making like this, and that they'll continue to, take feedback and grow, the game and the player base. So that was good and refreshing to hear at the very least, even though I don't think it was necessarily something that needed to be done, but like I said, with the majority of their fan base being casual, and like I said, people not being people, they're gonna ignore, warning signs anyway. They're not gonna really, care if they're, not leveled up high enough, they don't have the best stats, like people who were taking it seriously did. Like I said, the small minority hardcore player base. I'm sorry, hardcore players. I'm not mocking you. I swear. I'm not trying to make fun of you. We do appreciate you. You're the ones that make the guides for us, us noobs and whatnot. So we appreciate you for that and all your hard work, but at the same time, don't be that guy. Don't be that guy that's a elitist jerk, and tries to boast that, you have all these people, and they'll just come at your beck and call. Don't do that. Don't be that guy. So, but yeah, anyway, that was Eureka. But also, in regards to older content that we're used to, they've added like different, mechanics and such, and which were fantastic to see. They made things, different and made it so that, the game feels a little more refreshing and new, so that it's not just the same old song and dance. So like dungeons, regular dungeons that we're used to, they had different and new mechanics, or maybe some older mechanics combined into one, and that was really interesting, and like I said, it was more refreshing, made it feel new and improved. And I was happy that they were trying new things too, so I will give them a thumbs up for, trying new things. That's always great to see them try new things and, get our suggestions, get our feedback on, if we liked it, what we would change, stuff we didn't like about it, all that sort of thing. They really like to, receive what we think could be done better, and then they'll talk over it and see if it can be done, and all that, the processes they go through. They'll do that and decide, like, I guess it's probably like a majority rules thing, like, they discuss and say, so who, they probably sit in their offices or whatever and say, okay, so we've had this idea in front of all in favor, nay, raise hand, whatever, all in favor, opposed, And if, if they're in favor of making the change, then they make the change. If not, then, it doesn't happen, but maybe revisit it at some point later. They do consider, like, all feedback, regardless. Regardless of, if it's ridiculous or no. They do consider all the feedback. So now let's talk about the jobs. One of the big things that's happened in Stormblood. So they did decide to change how jobs function and how they work in this expansion. Which, this was all brought about because all the balancing issues they had with Heavensward, where some healers or some tanks were more optimal than others. And like some jobs were more preferred than others for stuff like raiding or, extreme trial fights. Which kind of, it wasn't their fault at all. Like, they get so much heat for it, but it's really not their fault at all for that. It's the player's fault. And I can say that as a player of this community, of this game, it really, when it comes down to it, it is our fault. Because, we've conveyed that message to them, that, this is broken, this doesn't work, this needs to be reiterated, this needs to do better, so we're basically, we're dooming ourselves in a way when it came to this change, because we bitched, we moaned and complained, and they're like, okay, well, we'll do it, but, don't complain and cry later, because this is what you asked for, sort of ordeal, Of course, going back, like I said, people are people, and they're just gonna be unhappy and complain about anything and everything anyway. Because if they're not satisfied with something, they feel this entitlement, that it's their God-given right to, complain. And, I know what I said earlier, too, about developers and players, we have every right to give them feedback because we are paying for this game. We're paying for the service, so we have every right to complain if something isn't to our liking, but still, the devs, need to decide for themselves, which complaints are warranted and which ones are not. And that will overall in turn decide the future of this game, So really, player base, I'm looking at you here. Be careful of what you ask for. Really and honestly, just be really careful what you listen for, because they really don't know which voice is true and which voice to believe, They just know that if it's something that's very vocalized, that they can see it and everyone else can see it, then they see that, okay, well, it must be true then, right? Right? They'll ask their translation teams. They'll be like, right? They all agree on this, right? And, they'll either say, yeah, they do, or no, and, this community here says no. You know, they'll say it, They will. So, like I said, be careful what you ask for. Just plain out. Because they get very confused by what we actually want versus, what's not wanted. So, it's very important, folks, to please be careful what you ask for and what you want. Because they're going to do it. You should know that by now. They are going to do it. Because most groups that be vocal about it, they're going to keep being vocal about it. Till the ends of time and the end of the world and all that. So, just some advice, some personal advice from me. Be careful what you ask for. So anyway, sorry, little detoured off there, but with the jobs, they took out the whole, role system where you had to have X job level in order to use X ability, sort of thing, and that these abilities were tied to only these jobs, etc. And so the role system that they revamped allowed for a set of presets that every job would need within the respective category that they were using, of course. So they divided this into categories. Healers, range DPS, magic DPS, and, physical melee DPS and tanks. That's how they divided this new role system into. And they gave into the system, specific actions which they feel like, that genre, that category should have, and that it would be to their benefit to have, these actions or abilities. And so that kind of eliminated the old system where, you had to have this job leveled in order to use this ability, etc. So they did away with that, which was good. I'm glad they did, because it would have been a headache if they added more abilities, and so you're like, oh man, now I'm going to have to level this one, as I need this, or I have to have this one, or I got to level that. And the experience gained if you hadn't been playing 14 is no joke. It's exceedingly high. We're breaching in the millions now, so it's really no joke. So I'm thankful and grateful that they changed that and decided to do things that way. So with that in mind, we got that all finished, and it was pretty well received overall. However, some complications were arisen where, a certain group of the player base feels like some actions are just kind of useless in the end, and like, why did they add these? We don't need it. All that sort of thing. Just the usual pick apart sort of reaction that more critical players will have, like I said, Hardcore players. They're the root of this dissension here, so them and their metas, what can I say? And honestly, Yoshida's had enough of that too. Them and their metas, by the way. He finally lost his nerve and spoke out against it. He's like, look, guys, you need to chill out, okay? It doesn't matter what job you play. You can beat any content with any composition. That's what he flat out told them, although in a more common, more professional way than I am. But that's basically the gist of it, where he said it's down, to the player's skill level, not by what job they play. So he's just done with the hardcore people and their metas. He's just done with it, guys. He's had enough. So yeah, so that's those nitpickers, like I said, he's just done with it. But overall, like I said, it was received pretty positive, the role system changes. Next is going into some of the job changes themselves. Going over specific ones, White Mage, for example, really got kind of torn apart, and I don't really think that was their intention, but to the players who've been, maining it, they've been playing it a lot, they really noticed the significant, lack of abilities that they once had that were no longer there, and instead replaced in the role system. Oof, ouch, yeah. So, poor White Mages, they really got it bad this expansion. They kind of lost a little bit of their identity. A similar case happened to the Paladin back in Heavens, where they lost, their identities too, but somehow managed to get it back this expansion. But, the poor White Mages just lost a lot of things, and so we can only hope, going forward in this next expansion that, they really think about this. They don't, they don't purposely tear things apart down to where, it just ruins, like the feel of the job and, like what made it so enjoyable, Really hoping that they take that in consideration when they go in with this new expansion to come. Another thing is, Bard and Machinists, they no longer have a cast timer or a cast bar, which is fantastic, I don't really know why that was such a popular thing back when it was implemented. I mean, if you use logical sense, you're not gonna sit there and, charge a gun and be like, it's coming, I'm gonna get you with this gun. It's charging, it's almost there. It's 90%. 5 minutes later, okay, I'm gonna shoot you. Oh wait, where'd he go? Or you're dead on the floor because you didn't even get off. You're like, I think I need a better gun. My gun's broken. Or, you know, you'd be being the archer, the bard, you know. You're not gonna sit there and hold the arrow forever. Your arm's bound to get, like, really tired, I'd imagine. So, you know, the change to that was good. I'm glad they made it so that there's no longer the cast time, because that was a huge problem. Especially, you know, for jobs that aren't supposed to be magical in nature. There's just, you know, they're just common sense, like, I'm going to load a round in the gun, I'm going to shoot it. Or I'm going to I'm going to pull the arrow from my quiver and shoot it, you know? Common sense. Common sense. And then, a lot of jobs, other jobs, you know, they just got removal of some skills, and new things were added to them, or some things were combined together, which is all fine and good, of course, but like I said, it's important that they don't, you know, ruin what was fun about that job and what made it feel special, you know. So that's something they need to take into consideration going forward here, I feel like, is that they need to make sure, like, the job's identity and its overall, you know, its function still stays intact, and that it's enjoyable for the player. And unfortunately for me, one of the jobs I really liked and enjoyed in Heaven's Word, I had to give up on because it was changed so drastically. It just didn't feel the same for me anymore. I won't say what job, because, you know, I don't want to open any cans of worms or have festering arguments in the comment section below. Everyone saying, you know, oh, well, it's fine. I think it's fine. No, this is what's bad. It's good. You're talking nonsense. You know, I don't want to spark any fights, so I'm not going to tell you which job that was. Maybe if you're on the same server of me, maybe you can private message me and I'll tell you, but on here, we're not going to say anything. But, you know, it's very unfortunate, a job that I really liked and enjoyed. You know, it was picked apart to where I just could not enjoy it anymore. And so I've moved on to the new job, which is my current main, that being Samurai. And, you know, it's been a really relaxing, really enjoyable job for me. I feel like it's probably the most flexible of the melee DPS that we have in game. Granted, you know, it does lack, you know, sort of group utility, as, you know, like I said, as the metas will say. Like I said, I already told you how Yoshida feels. He's had enough with that. But, you know, it's really something I really wanted for a long time. Even when I started this game, you know, I thought it was going to be a lot like 11, where, like, oh, you know, I'd have access to all these varieties of jobs and stuff. But then when I was going to pick a job, you know, I know, so like, oh, well, where's the DPS that has a sword, you know? I'm not that good at tanking, and I don't think I'd be able to do good at the tank. And you know, I was really anticipating to play as Samurai for a long time, so I'm happy, you know, they finally, you know, said yes and added Samurai here into Stormblood. made me very happy, like I said, and it added a lot of things that I really wanted for Melee to have as well. So I'm very happy with Samurai right now. I hope it continues to stay enjoyable for me in the next expansion, because I'll be quite sad if it's not, to be honest, and I there's not really going to be another job to replace it for me. So if anything happens to where my enjoyment's gone, I'll just be like bitterly, like kind of mumbling to myself in a corner or whatever, saying, "Oh, there's they didn't give me this. They took away my," I'll just kind of be that bitterness, but I'll still probably keep it if it's still playable enough for me. But other than that, the other new job they added was a Red Mage. This was one that was highly requested, especially after Heaven's Word launched. A lot of people were like, "Where's my Red Mage? When are we gonna get my Red Mage? Can I have a Red Mage, please?" And Yoshida happened to also mention, he's like, "Yeah, I remember that job. I enjoyed that job too." So, he started talking through with his team, and they decided, what ways could they implement it into the game, ways where it's not like going to completely break the game. And I did find a clever way by balancing it out so that it's like an iteration of White Mage and Black Mage combined. And it has spells based off that concept that it's, all that. And so they have this gauge with it, which is another thing, since we're on the topic of jobs that have been added, is gauges. They've added these gauges, which sort of are a visual representation to help you keep track of certain effects that your job has. Like for my Samurai example, we have what is called Kenki and Sens. The Sens are what pile up to, sort of give us, our buffs, like special access to like special attacks, special abilities. And the Kenki is sort of like in a way it feels like a TP bar, I guess, because you're expending it to use certain abilities. So in that regard, it does feel kind of like a TP gauge in a way. Which, I mean, that could be a problem that they could, fix with Samurai. Is fix the Kenki thing so it's doesn't feel like we're, having to keep an eye on it all the time, 24/7. With Red Mage, it has this gauge where your goal is to fill it up with White Mage, or White Magic, sorry, and Black Magic, and then you'll be able to spend those points to execute a very strong attack, very strong abilities, etc. And not only that, but the Red Mage was given the extra ability of sort of being able to heal party members and themselves, as well as, resurrect or raise any KO'd player. So in that respect, kind of like Summoner in a way. But the only difference being is that they added a special edge or gimmick to Red Mage, which is dual cast, where basically you cast one spell like a normal way, and then your next casted spell is an instant cast. So if you're really someone who likes magic class and you like having those instant casts, then this is probably the job for you. Me myself, I personally couldn't really get into it. Like, mechanical wise, it just isn't something that I feel is for me. It's not something I personally like, and I also don't like being that player that has extra responsibility on his shoulder in case healer kicks it, they get hit by an instant kill mechanic, and then it falls to me to have to save everyone. I don't really like that added responsibility when when I'm supposed to be just DPS, and I'm just supposed to focus on dodging or executing a mechanic, and just making sure things are dying faster. Which again, that's one of those things I enjoy about Samurai, is that I don't have any of this extra load on my shoulders, any of this extra responsibility that I have to have, what sets that apart from all the other DPS, which again, that's that meta again. Were saying, they were smack talking on my Samurai, and they're saying like, that's just greedy, selfish DPS. That's all they do is just DPS. They're not good for nothing. You know what, Meta? What I say to you is, that's what a DPS is in its rawest and purest form. It's DPS. Not making sure the healer has MP, not making sure that the other jobs are getting MP and TP, or, that they get an extra shield or whatever for the tank's benefit. That is not what a DPS defines a DPS. DPS were not here for your benefit. Basically, we're here for our own benefits and to make sure that we can clear things as a group. That's our basic functionality as DPS, is to make sure things get cleared. We're not there to be supportive job. That's not why we're there. We're not support. In no shape or form is DPS called support. Which, I mean, some will argue that, of course, and say, well, that's what, Machinist and Bard is, their support, so why can't these other ones be support too? That's not how it works for DPS, my friends. Like I said, DPS in its purest and rawest form is just that, damage per second. We don't have time to worry about what you're doing. We're busy trying to maintain our rotations to execute mechanics or dodge them. And we don't have time to deal with what's going on with you. We don't have time for that, okay? We're there to make sure things get done and they get done right. That's what DPS are. That rant aside, Red Mage was well received and well played by many players who wanted it. It may not be exactly how they wanted it, but again, they still liked it either way. So it's another thumbs up for the dev team there. It was enjoyable for those who liked it, those who wanted to have it. And yeah, I think we can close out the job things there. And last thing we have to talk about is the story content. So, the story content. Going in to this through the story into it was pretty smooth. Like, we had a pretty smooth transition into it. We knew like what was going on and the places we would be going. Well, I mean, maybe not so much for the Othard part of things or Hingashi. Those were a little bit of surprise. We knew that we were going to be going eastbound, but we weren't sure, like, you know, like what these places pertained of, so there was that. But also, not only were we going there, but we were also going to somewhere closer to home in Eorzea territory. And that's Alamigo, which, if you've been a player since 1.0, this brings back some more nostalgia effect. And it's also something, you know, the devs wanted to get cleared out of the way. They wanted to make sure that it was touched upon and that it wasn't just strictly a 1.0 thing, you know. They wanted to make sure that it was revisited, it was touched upon, you know, what exactly the situation was in Alamigo, you know, what life was like for, you know, NPCs there, and all that. They wanted to make sure that was all cleared up, and they did that pretty well here with this expansion and clearing the air of that, and also expanding upon it even more with more lore into, like, you know, the history of Alamigo and the territories of which it governed. They did a brilliant job, you know, kind of setting that apart and getting that cleared out. And in fact, one of the areas within, you know, Alamigo that I really liked became one of my favorites, and that's the Peaks area. It's really beautiful and like sort of mountain ranges, and I really enjoyed that. It was fun to roam around in the Peaks, and it's especially beautiful at nighttime. Like, very phenomenal lighting and everything. I really enjoyed the Peaks area. It was really great. And then going into, you know, Othard and Hingashi was even better for me because I really like that aesthetic, as you can tell by, you know, sort of looking at my studio here a little bit. It's certainly got a bit of a Eastern aesthetic here, and my fish tank there. And my robe that I'm wearing, you know, I really liked, you know, the Far East, you know, culture and lore of that. So it was very awesome to see that they finally took us there and we got to learn more about the history and backgrounds of that place. And in fact, if you've been a subscriber or, you know, a viewer of my channel, you'd know that It also ties into my character's personal lore, which I have built and established upon. And I've been an ongoing series on my channel, the lore of my character here, and I'm going to, of course, continue on with it with more videos in the near future. I can't say when, but you'll just need to keep looking out for them, and I will make sure, you know, people are informed of when those streams go live. So if you're a real lore person, you really like, learning about people's lore, their story, then that series, it will be something of a delight for you. And it's fun for me too, because I'm a natural storyteller, and I really like telling stories to, people. So it's a fun series, and I will definitely get back on it as soon as I can. That being said, we go into both pretty smoothly, and the Oathard bit was kind of alluded as sort of a surprise. Without getting too in detail or spoilery. It was decided upon, based on the situation that we were facing, our characters and our NPC, allies, that it was decided that we needed to enlist, basically get the help from our far eastern allies, and to do that we had to go travel there ourselves and kind of see what the situation is there for them, and hopefully come to a agreement and forge an alliance with them as well. And so that precedence was established, and we went there. We kind of helped them deal with what they were dealing with there, and then we kind of shift back again to the Alamigo side, and we're moving forward against the tyrannical Garlean Empire together. Pretty epic moments there. And then the 4.0, that main story just kind of started branching off to more of a sort of political standpoint, if you will. Gets into a lot of heavy political standpoints and views, and how war's handled, how the aftermath of it affects people, and all that sort of thing. We get into the deep sort of political nature of Alamigo, of Eastern territories, and Oathard and stuff. Really get into those political things after the fact that we've essentially liberated both areas from the Garleans. We start then shifting the focus to more political gains and what we can do, united together, etc., etc. And then then we start shifting away from that later on, and then we're focusing down on a real and true threat now, which is a threat with which we're very familiar with by now, and that is the harbingers of darkness and bringers of calamities, the Asians. And so now we start, really cracking down on that issue, and we're like, this would be, something we need to take care of, otherwise our future will always just be a fantasy. It will always hang in the balance so long as they're, they're around, you know. So then we start teetering off to like how to deal with that situation and what can be done to sort of stop them or, you know, sort of undermine their efforts. But then as this is all going down, you know, we have people that are sort of dropping like flies and we can't really explain this phenomenon and like what's going on with it. All we know from one of our closest allies is that they're basically being summoned elsewhere, like they're not, but they can't take their bodies with them for whatever reason. So their souls are being basically summoned to go someplace else. And I mean, if you haven't kept up with the recent announcements and news, that we've basically got a confirmation of what's happening. You know, we're going to be going to a new world completely. Will no longer just be, you know, restricted to strictly Heidelin anymore. We'll be going to an actual brand new world, which is basically, you know, still Heidelin in a way, but like it's kind of separated from Heidelin. Which, again, it's another story plot device, a point that has been brought up before in the story, even back in Heaven's Word. Like, if you haven't been really if you're catching up now or whatever and you don't really know, then this is probably spoiler for you, so I apologize in advance. You might want to, I don't know, maybe mute the audio if you're watching, or fast forward, you know, to a point where it's not being talked about or whatever. And then, but basically, you know, this new world we're going to is called a Shard of Heidelin. And they're calling this the first. That's just it, really, just the first. So, basically, you know, the first Shard, which was the first to, you know, I guess break off from Heidelin. And, you know, these shards are called a reflection of the source. So, essentially, what that means is that, you know, it is a different world. It's not like our world, but it's kind of, in a way, is, you know, the same world that we know. But it's just, you know, structured differently than compared to what we are familiar with and know. So, and, you know, our purpose for why we need to go there, why we need to, you know, basically leave our world behind is not yet known as of right now. And we probably won't know until late June if you've pre-ordered the next expansion, or, you know, later in July if you're planning on buying the new expansion, which is called Shadowbringers. And then you'll have all your answers there, you know, like what's happening with our story and where it's going. But overall, you know, I think that they did a pretty good job with the story. It was definitely a lot different. I mean, some would call it boring because, like, again, it focuses a lot on, you know, political gains and motivations and war, and that's usually not something that interests a whole lot of people. A whole lot of people want, like, there to be, like, action and adventure. You know, they want, like, fantasy, you know, sort of conflicts going on, and that's what they expect from a game that's called Final Fantasy. So for them to kind of give us a story here where it's sort of torn between, you know, what's fantasy and what's reality, it kind of gives us a different perspective, a different, like, feel for the game. And so, you know, it was something, you know, that we weren't anticipating. But overall, its initial, you know, initial receive was pretty well received. Except, you know, till, you know, the end, which, I mean, you know, I have to be honest here. The end was really kind of disappointing. And it felt like it was, you know, extremely rushed. A rushed conclusion. And we still have more questions than answers given in this conclusion. Like, you know, what happened to our friends? You know, why were they taken away? Why are they going to this first? Why are we going to this first? Who this mysterious, like, newcomer is, this identity of the mysterious voice who was calling us. We didn't get any answers on that. They just still keep the figure shrouded in mystery, and the figure itself says his name is not important when asked. And then, you know, the conflict we had going on was brought to a sort of dismiss. Like, it's not a conclusion. You can't really call it a conclusion because that's not what it is at its base value here. It's not a conclusion at all. It's more like a ceasefire, basically, than a conclusion. Whereas, you know, the evil empire, you know, they withdrew, you know, from the field of battle because of, I guess, these allegations, these false allegations being, you know, being raised at the court, their royal court. And so, you know, the emperor, he has to rush back home and, you know, diffuse the tension and be like, no, there's nothing suspicious going on. Don't be silly, you're being ridiculous. Sort of ordeal. And then this prompts, like, you know, him to pull a recall of soldiers with him because their commander's no longer on the field, you know. Like, their general is, but their general, you know, isn't really who he says he is. So hence the reason why the emperor had to rush back is to, you know, say, hey, you know, that's just, you know, a false lie. It's rumor, and that's it, you know. And it feels like, you know, a very poor excuse to, you know, abandon, you know, this field of war you got going on. And I don't know, you know, it just felt really rushed and very anticlimactic. Like, it wasn't a true climax at all. It was, you know, it's more of a, you know, like, you know, this happened, now something else is happening. We're gonna ignore what's happening here. We're just gonna, go deal with this other issue now. The Garleans, they've ceased fire for now. We can take this moment to deal with another problem. But this other problem is sounding like it's not very small at all. I mean, we're basically having to leave our world, and entrust it to, other people, the Alliance leaders, the other Echo sensitive users. We're just kind of leaving them all behind, and we're like, yeah, I gotta go deal with this problem now. You just stay here, and don't try not to tear each other apart and die on me while I'm gone. Like, it feels like it was just badly written, and not as a disrespect to, Koji or Oda-san, I mean, they work really hard, they do, and sometimes, sometimes they have to make sure, a conclusion of sorts is made, but I don't really feel like we concluded anything at all with this Stormblood story, I don't think it was truly concluded. Because now we have this whole other issue, and not to mention, we have the Asians who are still plotting behind the scenes, So, it's just like, oi, you're like, oi vey, like, my God, what's gonna happen to our world? We're leaving it. We're the champion. We're the heroes. Like, who's gonna be able to take that mantle from us? Which, I mean, I guess we do technically have allies who could potentially handle the situation in our absence. We for example, now Ferdola, who, while she wasn't blessed by Heidelin herself, she has this basically manufactured echo ability, which makes her immune to primal influences, and as demonstrated with someone who mastered it, Xenos, it's really something that can be weaponized quite easily and used against the Asians in a way. And then you have, like I said, you have the other Echo users of the Scion's order. You have Hori Boulder, I think his name's Coolio. You have Elaine, I think her name was, the Elvisan girl with her grandpa. I don't know if her grandpa's echo sensitive. They didn't really say. I'd have to imagine he is. And he's not just some, random old dude that they picked up with his granddaughter, Elaine. I have to imagine the grandpa's probably echo sensitive too. Otherwise, he wouldn't have lived probably as long as he has. So, yeah, we have them, and they could probably handle the situation well enough so that we have something to come back to. It's not just all squashed completely by the Garleans by the time we return, the Garleans and Asians, I should say. So I'm pretty sure that things will be taken care of, but still, it says a lot when, you know, your hero, your your basically one-man army is basically having to leave you, you know. Your ASEAN repeller, all that, you know. It's kind of a big deal when they're all of a sudden just taking off to this other world. So, and we didn't really get that closure either with this end of the story here. So, I mean, you kind of have to think, in the what is the dev's intent behind this? You know, like is there going to be, you know, when we get this next expansion, is it going to be like how we imagine it will be, or will it just be all thrown together in like something that wasn't given much thought into, like we see here? Like, I don't think much thought was given into this, the ending of this story here, the ending of this expansion. Like, I don't feel like was much thought put into it at all. They just, you know, they quickly drafted it up, they submitted it, and they're like, let's get this going like right now. We don't have the time to, you know, consider anything. Just make it and let's call it good, you know. Like, I feel like that's honestly what happened, you know, is that it was fastly strewn together without them thinking about like answering questions, you know, or concluding it in a meaningful or impactful way. So, and you know, that's the highest selling point of this game too, is that the story is like phenomenal for like every Final Fantasy game that's out there right now. You know, the story is really that sort of reward, that icing on the cake sort of thing that makes Final Fantasy really great. And then, you know, to just kind of have something given to us like this, and we had to wait 3 months for it, by the way. 3 months for this, you know, this really short, brief conclusion. You know, it makes you wonder and think, you know, was this just, you know, a ploy, a scheme, if you will, of them, you know, to keep us subscribed, keep giving them money, you know? Or did they really, you know, decide that this was the best way to end things, you know? So, in regards to that, you know, we had a poor start to this expansion, and now it feels like it's being a poor ending as well. And you know, that's got to be really, really tough on other reviews. Besides my own, you know, criticisms, my own critiques and thoughts here, that's got to be really hard for, you know, these media outlets out there, like, you know, like GameSpot, you know, all these people that interview the developers and stuff. That's got to be a very sensitive and tough topic now to touch upon, because, you know, the devs probably know in the back of their mind, you know, like, maybe this isn't the best way to do this, you know, which, with how this was poorly received in the beginning, and yet now how it's being poorly received at the end, in a way, you know, it really kind of makes you worry for the future in a bit and wonder, you know, if this is, you know, really what direction they want to take. Do they really just want to make this like every other MMO and go the quickest and cheap route that they can and not have to worry about any particulars, you know? Because if so, then, you know, they're setting themselves up for failure by doing things that way. And that's why, you know, lately and recently in recent news that these other companies, they're not doing so hot. They're not doing so great. And it's because, you know, they're going the quickest and cheap route they can. And they're not listening to their players, their fans anymore. They're ignoring them outright. And that's what leads to the ruin of a game and development company. Is when you start ignoring your fans and your players, that's what leads to failure. And a lot of us want to believe, and we want to think that that's not the case being here. We want to believe and we want to think that they're not going to repeat the mistake of 1.0 all over again, where the dev team thought that they knew better than the player, that they were better than the player, because they're the developer, so anything, you know, they say, it goes. And people are just going to have to be satisfied with that, or take their money somewhere else, you know. That's the whole reason why, you know, the previous director and previous producer of 14, that's why they were laid off from this project. Why they were sent other projects, because what they were doing was just not acceptable and disrespectful to the fans, to the player base. And I really don't want, you know, 14 to go that way again, as it would be very heartbreaking to a lot of us who've stuck around so long now. I mean, I've been here for now 6 years in this game, and it's going to be a 7th by the end of this year. And I want to be sure, you know, that all my money that I've invested in this game, that I've gave to, you know, Square Enix in support of it, that it just isn't going to go down the drain and wasted, you know. I really don't want them to betray our trust like that again, because there will not be another turnaround if they do. It will be the death of this MMO, where only, you know, the casual of casualist players will play the game, you know, and they won't bother to do any of the more exciting content, the more difficult, challenging content, because it doesn't incentivize them to want to do it, you know. And where they'll just expect, you know, things to be handed to them on a silver platter, basically. That's what will remain of the player base. If we face another 1.0, it will only have those kind of players left here. And that would be so very, very sad for a lot of us. But in any case, thanks y'all for listening to this, you know, very long discussion, very long video. I hope that, you know, you'll take all things into consideration And you know that this is just one review of many, you know. My word is not by any means law, or I do not represent like the community as a whole in any way. I'm just one guy, one YouTuber, and the voice of many. So, you know, take that as you will. And this is just, you know, this is just feedback and honest, you know, opinion. Because like I told you, you know, the developers really like feedback. And this is just part of that feedback that they need to review and take into consideration. And, you know, I hope that you also, you know, can touch upon some of the points I've made here in this video, you know, and sort of relate to some of them, if not one of them, you know. Because I know not everyone can agree on everything, and that's okay. You know, we're not all going to, you know, agree on what should be done and what's right for the game. You know, we all have different perspectives, different views, but we can still respect each other and be fair to each other, you know. So, like I said, thank you again for bearing with me in this excruciating long review. It's definitely something I needed to get off my chest and needed to get out there. And I pray and hope that, you know, this game continues to succeed and, you know, continues to be better than it was yesterday, you know. And, you know, I just really hope that, you know, a lot of things change for the better, and that, you know, that they're not just gonna, you know, rob us and run. Anyway, this has been Amadeus Aeon on Deus Games. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you for watching. It would mean a lot to me if you could leave a like down below, or a comment if you wish to. Subscribing is optional. It does not have to be done for any particular reason other than you'd just be helping me out a bunch. I appreciate you either way for viewing, and everyone have a wonderful day, night, or evening, whichever time it is for you, and we will see you again in my next video. Farewell.